Chapter 11, writing feature stories. Throughout this course, you'll be discussing different types of writings, from news stories to sports stories. But today's focus is on feature stories. Feature stories are, I don't want to say always the most popular, but they're usually more interesting than some of the news. I mean, the news is important. You need to know the content. The stuff happening overseas right now. You need to be informed. And that's really what it is. Feature stories, while they can still inform you, a lot of the times they're to entertain. And as you saw by the types in the reading, you can probably think back to several that you've read, maybe just in the last week or so. Reading, if you ever pick up magazines, even Rolling Stone or Maxim, those particular magazines, while they are focused on a certain demographic for readers, with their stories and about cars and gadgets and things like that, those aren't necessarily feature stories. But within their magazine, they can have bigger, several 10,000 word stories on some aspect of the world. I distinctly remember reading in Maxim about one of Saddam Hussein's sons. Before he was, even to our consciousness here in America, people might have known of him, but his dad definitely trumped him. But then reading stories about how bad this kid was, and then I heard like 3 or 4 years later there were news stories talking about the same. So I'm like, how do I know about this? This sounds familiar. And I was able to remember back, for some weird reason, back to that feature story that I had read. It was in Maxim forever ago, and I was educated. While someone might say that's newsworthy, and it was a news story, it was something that was put together, and as we'll see in here, it wasn't necessarily, it needs to run today for it to be news. It needs to run by tomorrow for it to be news. This was something that was a profile piece on this person that could run at any time, and the sooner it ran to the situation that made them relevant, probably the better it would be. But it wasn't it needs to run and get online right now. Breaking news. It wasn't breaking news. It was just, while it was educating us, it was informing us and entertaining us as well. So with going through the chapter, writing feature stories, there was just a lot of characteristics, and it being a very short chapter, I just wanted to focus on just those little basic elements of significance. And the first was, like I just started talking about, leading into timelessness. The ability to, you could write this or work on this for a couple weeks, and when it's done, it can get, revised and edited again, and there is no set, it needs to go by this time. Now, of course, there are exceptions to each instance, but for the most part, there's something that you could work on and put it on a back burner for a little bit, and then when they need something, hey, this one's great, and it's ready to go. The creative style characteristic is really interesting because this could take the form of so many different things. A basic news article, where you're introducing the who, what, where, when, how, and why at the beginning, and then you have interviews. So there's not much creativity in the basic news writing. Sports writing, you can probably have a little bit more, but if you're just reading a recap of the night's game before, there's probably not much creativity there. Maybe an interesting introduction and conclusion, but other than that, it's just basic facts and interview. Just look through a sporting page 2 or 3 days in a row. Almost every sports story recap is the same formula. And so feature writing really gives people the opportunity to flex their creative ability. It could be something written in like a journal format. There could be a reporter who goes through boot camp and keeps track of it. Each day, maybe each half day they write a little something. And then they could write that out in some sort of journal type thing. Well, that wouldn't be a news story, but that you would be featuring one particular thing, and it would be the story. We spoke about Nellie Bly a while back. Nellie Bly was the investigative journalist who committed herself into an insane asylum in order to learn all of the bad things that were happening, and then she exposed the truth. Okay, that would have been a big feature story that she wrote. Yes, it was newsworthy in that it changes things, but it was one big feature that didn't necessarily have to be aired today, tomorrow. It could be worked on over weeks like hers. If anybody watches 60 Minutes or you see your folks watching and flipping through, a lot of those are feature stories. They very rarely are breaking news on that. Now when they do break news, like a lot of baseball, Alex Rodriguez and his steroid use a few years back, saying that he did it, he sat down for an interview. That stuff was leaked and it was passed around the internet. People knew about it, but they still tuned in to see it build and to hear it from his own words. But those are predominantly feature stories where they go, hey, let's go do a story about the displacement of certain indigenous tribes down in the Amazon because of deforestation. Let's bring the awareness of that up here. Let's go do one on the meat and the due dates in area supermarkets. Okay, let's just see if people are, if they're just putting new labels on them, or you know what I mean? If things expire, you don't want to have that, but do they get rid of that? And do they still sell it? Do they put a new sticker on and go? So that's a feature story. And while that the final product could be very, wow, that's very newsworthy. Wow, they're lying to us, and we're going to sue them. And that could turn into a news story, but the feature is educating us about something while doing it in sometimes a very entertaining way. But the creative style and the timeliness, those are very important to differentiate between news and this. And then the last real characteristic that I really want to focus on was the unlimited subject possibilities. This could be anything and everything. Just in the last minute, I talked about meat expirations and deforestation down in the Amazon, and forcing tribes who have lived there for hundreds of years, thousands of years, I don't know, and forcing them to move away from their home. So I mean, you could write anything and everything. I was just reading something online this morning before school about Navy divers trying to go around the world and find World War II downed wrecks in the water, ships and airplanes, and try to find closure for those people's family who missing in action. And so they are able to find little bone samples somehow, I don't know, after 70 years in the water, but they were able to, stuff's pretty well preserved. Now, I don't think they see skeletons like Pirates of the Caribbean underwater or something, but they were able to find some sort of DNA, and they're hopefully, once they take it back and make a process, they can put a closure to something. Now that is a feature story, and it's very in-depth and developed. Some of it's written like a journal, others are just newsworthy aspects, but it can be almost about anything you want. Anything, okay? You could go into a feature story about how, censorship or movie regulations with the ratings of movies, how that has impacted, the box office numbers. Movies that are rated R, tend to not do as well if they're aimed at younger people. If it's like an action adventure movie, like Fast and the Furious, those are PG-13 for a reason. If they were R, a lot of the demographic that they're going for can't see it, or if parents have to take, that whole thing. And so they strive for the PG-13. So they want to keep the action, but okay, well, language we really like, but we got to bring that down. The Expendables movies, those go for R because they're not aimed at the 12, 13, 14. If you notice, they're all aging actors who 20 years ago were the biggest blockbuster people. Right? You've heard those movies? Okay? And so, they want the R, they want to be able to blow stuff up and kill as many people and just say whatever they want, and they do, in order to get that R rating. And I remember that there was Chuck Norris didn't want to do them because it was just so, with the bad language. He ultimately did do it, but I don't know if they cut down the swearing in his scenes or what, because he has a wholesome image. Whatever. But anyway, so the unlimited subject possibilities they're just endless. And in newspapers of high schools, this is the really interesting section where people are given a lot of creativity as to what they cover. Now with the news, front page usually, that's still important stuff that's going on, and they are educating and informing people. But with the features, that's really where you can get your claws into really, journalism and dive into it. Those other sections are wonderful. You do have some creative elements and opportunities depending on what subject matter you want to write about, but features is really where it's at. So if that's something that interests you, keep that in mind. Personality profiles are things that, as it says, you're just profiling individuals. And this is a wonderful opportunity where you could focus on individuals around at the school setting, people that go unnoticed. You know, you can have a day in the life of a custodian. What do they really do all day? What do they do at night? You know, there's people here while you guys are sleeping, right? Getting things cleaned up and put together. There's always somebody in the building doing things. What do they do? What's the requirement? Well, I see them getting the trash. Well, what else? The school would shut down almost instantly without certain people. What about the cooks? What time do they get here? I don't know, 9 o'clock? I'm sure it only takes about an hour. No, they're here before the teachers, for the most part. They're here really early. Well, what do they have to do? Well, they have to cook for 2,000 students. What does that look like? If you had to make just sandwiches for everybody in your house, that'd probably blow your mind for them. Okay, well, this is going to take a while. Okay, get everything out, get the bread, blah, 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 blah. Imagine doing cooking, not just sandwiches, cooking for a couple thousand people. And so you were able to focus on personalities and find out about individuals, but you were also able to provide an insight into behind the scenes stuff. That's always real popular. Focusing on a student who got nominated or is going to some national competition, you're able to inform people about what they're doing, but also focus on skit. I mean, we did profile stories on kids who compete dirt bikes or dancers who are nationally ranked, and I mean kids who fly or people who skydive, or just anything and everything could be in the features section. Okay, and it's really up to you and what you want to write about or what you think is interesting. You and your editors who help with the decision making, and it's really the sky's the limit, folks. And that's what's really neat about this particular type of writing. You can really flesh out information about these individuals and give them a voice. You might read something in the newspaper, the news section, and so and so was arrested for whatever or died, blah blah blah, and you learn the basic facts about it. But if there was a feature story rather, and it was really in depth, you could see that person had a soul, and you could find out what people really felt about them, and just more in depth about that particular individual. And that's just an example. You know, the last little bit talk about in the school paper. Again, you typically, and of course this is determined by what your school paper, what their philosophy is. I doubt that the school paper is going to run front page articles about government reform and what's happening at the House down at the state capitol. I mean, that's not really what it's for. Now, they can write about that maybe in an editorial, they might write about that in some column somewhere, but really you want to focus on thinking school-related stuff. How do these things in the real world impact us here at this particular school? And that's really the driving force of any school newspaper, or it should be in my opinion. But especially with the features, you have to think about under the umbrella of this needs to reflect back to our school, and let's educate and inform them and find some interesting things. And ultimately it is, you know, this is where your human interest stories, those news stories that are just, okay, this obviously isn't news, but it's interesting. Sometimes they're called fluff pieces. They're maybe just filler even, because, okay, we got 4 more minutes to cover in the broadcast. Let's find a story on this or go shoot something. Oh, you see all the cats that were, you know, rescued out of the tree. You know, there was a whole family of them. Oh, the little duckies, you know, stopped traffic on Coliseum Boulevard while they crossed. And oh, how sweet and cute. We have some video. Let's watch that. Is that newsworthy at all? You don't want to read a story about it? And of course, I would just give you a broadcasting example, but there is nothing hard-hitting about that at all. But yet, if we wanted to do some sort of story on migration patterns or how the mallard is endangered, blah, 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 we were able to develop it into more of a human interest and a feature story. So, like I said, focus back on these 3 or 4 traits that I just talked about, especially when we start doing more writing, you start maybe getting confused about, well, is this a news story? No, you should be able to look through a newspaper and point out news, feature, pick out a magazine, and be able to figure out, just based on what it's talking about, is that a feature, or is it news, or is it something else? Maybe it's just in a column, which is kind of like a blog. It's just them talking about one writer's opinion, and that might be something completely different in and of itself. But you know, with the feature stories, it probably looks at quick glance that it's just like the news, You have words, you have quotes, you have descriptions, plot to some degree if you're retelling a story. But it's really important that you understand the purpose of writing that feature story so that it doesn't revert back to a news and it stays maybe timeless, creative, that type of thing. So very, very basic. And the book, the chapter, hopefully you skimmed through some of those samples. I know it added a few pages of reading, but it was a kind of big print, so it shouldn't have been too laborious. But you should have been educated in looking at the models of those different feature writing as how they show up in their respective school papers. So I find that very helpful, especially when they show you some examples to reinforce what they were just talking about. So.